Welcome back to the show. Today we have a special guest. His name is Scott Wozniak. He's the author of Make Your Brand Legendary, Create Raving Fans with the Customer Experience Engine. This guy speaks my language. You're really going to enjoy this show. Let's get into it. Scott Wozniak, thank you so much for being on the show. We're going to get straight into it. Let's go ahead and start with, how did you come to your faith in Christ?
Man, I've got to give my parents credit for that. My parents, so I don't know if you've heard about the Jesus People movement or seen some of the movies about that Jesus Revolution and all that kind of stuff. That's my parents' story. I mean, they weren't the leaders of it, but they were some of the hippies who got radically saved and literally like left everything behind, traveled the country, trusting God for a place to sleep, doing evangelism. So they met in one of the crazy Jesus People ministry stuff. They got married out in Southern California, where a lot of that, the movie that was about that. So radical faith. And as they got married and started thinking about kids, and I'm second of 5 kids that they had, and the careers and jobs, my dad actually ended up going down to a Bible college in South Florida. And so that moved us down to Florida. And that's where I was born and raised. And so most of my childhood was that. And my parents had this radical faith. And I've just seen them make life decisions and personal decisions and wrestle with God in a very vivid way. And so, man, I came to the Lord young. I mean, pre-elementary school, early elementary, kindergarten, I think it was, maybe first grade. And yes, I remember vividly, I was Saturday morning sitting on the couch with my mom, and it was literally one of these moments like, they were talking about this at church, Mom. We're like, when did we pray? Like, I've always kind of believed, but I never really, like, when was my moment I committed? And so I made a commitment. And I really don't have one of those wild stories where it's like, man, I didn't know anything and I lived wild and then I came. I've always had a vivid sense that God was real and that I wanted to make my life about him. Now, I have had many ups and downs of how well did I actually know him or submit to him? And like, it seems like layer after layer, God's like, yeah, that area of your life that you haven't been willing to talk about, let's talk about that. And so I haven't always been living equally excellent, but there's really never been a sense where I didn't know God was real, didn't have some sort of desire or draw to him. And so it's really just this constant thread through my life. And so I occasionally do better or worse in actually living that out. But yeah, I grew up in a very vivid God household and early on said, man, I want to try this out. And God responded. And so there's just kind of been always this presence of God, the relationship really with God in my life. So huge thread. I mean, my career, my relationships, my marriage, everything's kind of run through this filter of like, well, Lord, what do you say? What does your word say? In my prayer life, what are we thinking about it? It's this underlying current in just about everything I do.
I just read in your book, just in the sleeve there, that you're part of Mensa.
Yeah, that's fair. Yep.
I remember when I was younger, I heard about this. I think it was in high school. I was like, wow, that's a pretty incredible group there. For those, like I was telling my video producer here about Mensa, he had never heard of it. So for those who've never heard of it, what is that? What is that about?
So Mensa is an international high IQ society. So the only real requirement to get in is you have to hit a certain IQ level and they've got like 9 or 10 different tests last time when I did it. You could take different versions, but there's these kind of, validated public tests. And if you get a certain score high enough, you get to join if you want. And honestly, I had heard about it in high school as well. And I was always in the, honors gifted program, blah, blah, blah. So I knew I had a good brain, but I wasn't that interested because I wasn't interested in getting it just for the vanity of it, right? Like, oh, look, I'm a high IQ guy. I was like, yeah, I don't really care. And then I was actually, when I was working at Chick-fil-A as one of their leaders, I ran across somebody else who was in it, and they were telling me what they actually did because I knew about it. And I was like, oh, there's this cool conference we go to, and this small group gets together and works on these projects, and we have these other speakers come, and they're all kind of high IQ speakers get together and process. And I was like, wait, there's learning community. Like, let me check that out. And so yeah, it was in my mid 30s, I think. I finally went and took one of those official tests because actually I've never taken one of the official IQ tests at that point. And so took it, got a good score, applied to Mensa, and man, I've had a blast. So I'll tell you, it's going to sound really nerdy. Like, oh, we get together, surely we talk about neuroscience. And they do have a phenomenal neuroscience journal that I've enjoyed. You know my favorite part of Mensa? Mensa Mind Games. They have an annual gathering, and they get together and test board games. Board game producers put their latest board games out. We usually have 50 or 60 board games a year. And it's Mensa members only who are gaming nerds. And we get together, and it's for 3 days. They just have this like conference room. It's like a giant hotel conference room with folding tables and games everywhere. And there's a whole process. You get assigned a certain number of games, and there's a 7 category scoring system and all this voting. And for like literally nothing else happens. There's no formal thing until the very end when they announce the results and they tabulate everything for us. But for 3 days solid, people just play board games all day, all night. The room never closes. Some people go to bed early. Some people wake up early. And you just play board games with each other. And you're constantly reading rules and checking styles and looking at win conditions. And so it's this whole process. And so if you've ever seen a board game with a gold little sticker on it that says Mensa Select, I got to be a part of doing that for many years. So yeah, it's funny. It's not what most funny. I'll kind of riff on this a little bit, Bronson, because I think this is one of the big insights I got from it. I love the community of Mensa. I've gotten some wonderful friends out of it. But you know what I expected when I went in that didn't happen for me? Some of the people in Mensa might be the people you're thinking of. The neuroscientists, the inventors, right? But can I just be honest? Most are not. You think, hey, you're really smart. You must be really successful. And here's what I found. The majority of them are no more successful than anyone else in terms of career, the standard things we do. And some of them are, I say this respectfully, some of these are my friends, but some of these guys have dead-end jobs living in their mom's basement in their 40s. It's the guy with unshaven, like scraggly beard. He wears black socks and sandals, right? I mean, that guy's in there too. Just because you have raw talent does not mean you are going to succeed or let's put a Christian slant on this, have an impact and be about the Father's business. What I've learned is there is, and we've done studies on this, like Mensa's looked into this, right? There is a pretty tight correlation to how successful you can be from your IQ as you get above average, right? Some options open up for you. If you're average, if you go above average, in fact, to be real specific, they say till about 120, 100 IQ's average. 120, 110 is going to be like, hey, I got A's and B's. 120 is probably the kids in all the honors programs. I got mostly A's, did cool stuff, but you're not a genius per se at that level, right? It's, hey, you're a smart guy. Now, IQ, genius level, it depends on who you argue with or what test, but usually we're going to talk about 140 is the lowest. Most people are going to say 160. I mean, so 120 is way below this. Up until 120, every point of IQ opens up more options and more impact. After 120, not only does more IQ not help, there's actually a negative correlation. The higher you go, the less likely you are to have real impact, real influence, and kind of success in your career. And it's interesting because now I'll tell you, as a guy from the inside, why? Because I think what I find a lot of these guys, now again, some of them go off and do amazing things, but a lot of them do not. What you find, I mean, the dude in the basement who's way underutilizing his capacity, his identity is wrapped up in how smart he is. And he cannot learn well from other people because he has to be the smartest guy in the room. He has to only do things that really are interesting to him. And if he gets bored, he quits. A lot of success is, dude, you have the discipline to show up in the mundane moments. And these guys are like, screw that, man. I don't do mundane. With my brain, I can't. And it actually gets harder to do slow moments for some of these guys. It's really interesting. The super high IQ guys, I think, have a harder time showing up in ways that is faithful service and influence and the kind of thing that builds a great brand. And I think a lot of us are saying, man, if only I was smarter, and I just don't have the raw talent. Why would God pick me? I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Dude, sometimes the smartest guy in the room is the least likely to be the one who can do what God needs to be done. Yes, it helps to have a little bit of extra intelligence, but I'm guessing most of the kind of people who would listen to this podcast and put a little extra effort into it, they're in the 100 to 120 range anyway. You just need to have smart enough chops to kind of learn and pick up cool concepts. And then after that, it's character, it's discipline, it's humility. I mean, it's the heart stuff that way outperforms the head stuff. And so, dude, I've loved Mensa. I'm delighted. I'm a lifetime member. I'm going to keep being a part of it. But it is actually not where all the super successful, super influencers hang out. It's where the nerds hang out. And some of those nerds figured out the character that allows you to go on and do cool things. But a lot of the nerds have not. And they keep thinking, listen, I'm the smartest guy. Why aren't I winning? I don't.
The good news is that I could bet $1 million that none of the disciples were in Mensa.
Yeah, seriously. Now maybe Paul was, right? If you look at Paul's resume, so maybe God, 12. God throws in a smart guy in the mix, just for us smart guys. Like, okay, I'll use you guys too, right? Somebody should write down and be the academic.
Read Romans.
Thank you.
Just read Romans. You're like, okay, this guy's a Mensa.
Yeah, but you're right, dude. Most of these guys didn't even have formal education of any kind. They were just good, hardworking people. God is interested in our character and our faithfulness. He does not need you to be Mensa level to do work. So love it. Yeah, but it's not what most people think it is.
Yeah.
It's
so the stigma, though,
to do cool things.
Here's a stigma is, correct me if I'm wrong, if you are a high intelligence, high IQ person, then you are unable to have faith. Especially faith in the things that do not present physical evidence, and then you can apply some sort of scientific analysis to it to come to a conclusion. So how do you wrestle with that as somebody who is a high IQ individual?
Well, I would say this. There is a correlation between high IQ and pride. We talked about this, right? It's easy for a lot of those folks to take pride in superiority and, hey, I'm better because I have a better brain. I think there's a high correlation between pride and unwillingness to submit to God, right? I mean, I think the fundamental of faith is a humility that says, maybe I can't figure this out myself. Maybe I do need somebody else. I mean, and I don't just mean, is God true? I mean, this deep sense of like, would I willing to submit my life to God? Awareness that God exists is not enough, right? The Bible says even that, that Satan knows God is real. Again, Satan can quote the scripture. That isn't going to get him into heaven. So this willingness to not just know about God, but to actually submit your life and make him the Lord of your life, that requires a humility. And so there is a challenge. In many ways, I would say that in modern society, especially American society, the smart man can be correlated to when Jesus talks about how hard it is for the rich man to get into heaven. And he says it's harder for him than it is a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Now, some of your listeners might know this, like you guys might, but if you don't, that feels like it's impossible, right? It's impossible for the rich man to go through. An eye of a needle is too small. No, yes, but there was a phrase for them. The eye of the needle was also the term for when they would close the gate of a city for protection. They opened this little mini gate. It was too small for anything major to get through, but you could. And the way to do that is you had to get your camel, and the camel barely fit. You could take all the junk off the camel, all your gear, all your equipment, right? And then the camel would have to kneel, if you've seen camels kneel, and then they kind of wiggle, squat. It is a pain. It is like you can't have your gear. Your camels don't like doing this, right? So they're ornery anyway, so you got to kind of squeeze and fight. You can get a camel through the eye of a needle as that little door. But the humility and discipline of it is you got to kind of let go of all your stuff. So I would say there is a challenge, because if the smart brain makes me think I'm prideful and I got this figured out, then there's this bias to say, man, I'm not submitting. I'm the expert here. I would never submit myself. However, I always say this: if you actually use your brain to dig, whether you're Mensa or not, and really dig into the science, people think the more you know about science, the less you know about God. I have found the opposite, and there's some really cool quotes. Some of the fathers of astrophysicists and Einstein's people, like they called it the God principle. That was the deeper you get, like when you get to the, was one guy famous, I'm going to mess the quote up, but it's something like when you drink to the bottom of the glass of science, at the very bottom, you find the only answer is God. Like there's some really cool, I could geek out. Like the current, Einstein was cutting edge, like, 100 years ago, literally. The cutting edge now of physicists is string theory. And I'll just give you a couple little, I read nerdy stuff for the fun of it, right? So in string theory, here's what they believe. According to the math and the physics and all this stuff, there are actually 11 dimensions that happen. But for some reason, they don't understand why only 3 dimensions unraveled. And the whole universe, the other dimensions are all tightly coiled and don't do anything. They have no function. They just exist in the background. But 3 dimensions and everything in the universe is in trilogies. And the reason they call it string theory is they think all of reality is really a particular vibration pattern. Now, you want to go biblical. How did reality begin? God spoke. The triune God speaks, and a vibration rolls out, and that's the reality we live in, is a 3-dimensional vibrational reality. I mean, total secularist physicists are like, the math is clear. There's a 3-dimensional vibrational based reality. I mean, it's really what we live in. And then you go back to the Bible and you're like, I could go on, but if you actually get into the physics, the biology, the psychology, I mean, the more you dig, it all points back to God. But whether you're in Mensa or not, I think there's a humility that's required to say, maybe I need someone else. Maybe I'm not going to figure this out myself. Maybe I should listen rather than speak, and declare what I want and say, like, well, what am I hearing and seeing, and be willing to learn. And so some of the most passionate faith people I know are in Mensa, and have PhDs in science and all this crazy stuff. It is not an actual conflict. I think the conflict is in the heart, not in the actual science.
I always found that interesting. You can have 2 of the same people with similar IQs, intellect, thinking ability. One of them has faith and the other doesn't. And I think that goes back to what the scripture says, which is faith comes from God. It does not come from us. It's a gift. It's a gift. It's not something that we just stumble upon. No. Yeah. The veil is removed by the Father, and that's it.
And it's we receive, right? It's even that part of it. We don't even make our own, like, listen, I'm so good, look at how cool my faith is. Like, that doesn't even work, man. The whole thing. And it specifically says in Ephesians 2, right? It's a gift from God so that no man can boast. And if we're trying to boast about our own spiritual faith, like it's not subtle. It's right there in the scripture. Like, you might be missing the point of this, buddy.
Yeah. All right. We have, unfortunately, we only have a limited amount of time. I could talk about this stuff for hours, but we're going to get into the business part now.
Okay.
So,
sure.
Let's get into your book, Make Your Brand Legendary. Like we were just talking about, I listened to it on the way to Disney, which is ironic because you talk about Disney.
Nice.
And it's like you're speaking my language. I've been in business for over 18 years. I've always had this natural knack or just perception or just noticing the little things that businesses do that make them stand out and that make them unique amongst the others. And you've really pinpointed a lot of the things that businesses are doing, like Buc-ee's, like Disney. I would even say Apple. But all the little things that are being done. So we'll get into that, but let's just do a little start here of what brought you to the point of finishing this book, Make Your Brand Legendary.
Yeah.
What's the story behind that?
It's a good question because I've actually been doing this work for 20 some years. I started using the engine 14 years ago. So I did the work for a while and was like, finally starting to write down, look at the pattern. Here's the structure. So 14 years ago, started describing the engine in detail and using that as a frame to help companies and figure this out. And there have been companies running on this engine for 14 years explicitly, this model. Chick-fil-A's been using they don't use the engine diagram, they use a different diagram, but using their version of it for longer. So it's like it's not that I didn't have the model or this is a new idea. The reason the book came actually is because I'm running out of personal time. Like I just keep hitting the limit on how much I've got a team. It went from me solo to like, well, maybe I'll do a team of people and we'll scale it more. So I've got, I don't know, 16 folks on my staff now, and we go around. I just got back last night from working with another client company, and I had a team come with me, and I'm doing some, and my team's doing some, and so I'm trying all of these ways to help more and more people. But dude, no matter how big I get my team and how much, there's still this physical limit. If I have to show up in person and talk about it and do all that stuff, I every year I say no to probably twice as many invitations as I say yes to. And when it got to like, I'll say no, maybe some, and I'll help a little. And like, it was about 2-3 years ago. I was like, yeah, we have to come up with a in-person way for us to help people with this. So the book, and it's funny you ask, literally the meeting I just got off of right before this with my team. I just walked out of that meeting and sat down to record this. It was about the online course, the online program that we're putting together that takes the book to the next level, because we're trying to create a suite of things. The book took off last year. So that was last fall, I guess about 6 months ago now. Won a bunch of awards, got a lot of more sales than we expected. Yay. Now, it actually made the problem almost worse, because now like, hey, how to come help us? Like, I can't do that. So you have the content now, but what if you want to get workshop or community or start getting deeper into the how, which the book is full of how, but there's even more. That's where the online program goes even the next level. So it's really a whole new world for me. And I'm having a blast trying to figure out how do I take the stuff that I've been doing that's kind of this elite in-person consulting and put it into a format that still works even if I don't show up. And it has been so much fun recording some videos and creating worksheets. And I've been beta testing it for the last 6 months with different groups. So there's some really fun stuff, but it's not new. It's not a new idea I'm testing. It's like, man, I've hit the limit on how, because I also want to be a good father. So I have literal limits where we say, hey, this is how much I'm willing to travel. This is how much I'm willing to be out of the house. This is my work day has to be done at this point at certain times. I mean, I don't care how much money, or I've even told my family, speak ministry-wise, it's great to be with Christian business leaders. I remember my early days when I was working with churches and things. When I was getting married to my wife, we talked a lot about this balance, this work-life balance kind of idea. And I said, listen, my first calling, marrying you, and if we have kids, my first calling is going to be to this family. That's my first ministry. That's my first job. I try to put as much planning and strategy and effort into that organization, my family, as I do my business side. And I told her, hey, listen, if 1 million people less I minister to, if that's what it takes for me to be a good husband and father, then those 1 million people, God will have to find another way to reach them. I am not going to reach the world at the cost of my relationship to you. So that principle is a hard line I draw in the sand, and I've pushed about as far as I can without breaking that. And so, yeah, now let's launch a book on this stuff. So that's why the book's full of all these tactical stories, because I just took the stuff I've already been doing with the brands I've already been doing it with and wrote them all down and said, okay, here's how they actually do it, guys.
So for those who are listening, could you give them like a 30-second bird's eye view of what the customer engine, how does that operate? What does that look like?
Yeah. So the first principle is this engine idea. It's not magic. It's not even about a product. If I could say 60-70% of our clients in the last 15 years, 14 years have been on the technical business to business kind of manufacturing, construction, enterprise software. I mean, the kind of stuff that doesn't look sexy. So it's not about the product. It's about the stuff. Now, if you have a bad product, I don't care how fancy the rest is, but basic products, Buc-ee's, right? The gas isn't better than anyone else's gas. Right. And by the way, if you don't know Buc-ee's, if you don't live where a Buc-ee's station is, just Google it. It is ridiculous, the hype that this gas station has. Ridiculous. I know. Yeah. And their gas is everyone else's gas.
Our listeners have heard me talk about that multiple times now.
Okay, good. Yeah. It's like people, like literally you can't believe, you're thinking, oh, it's better than other gas stations. Like, no, it's this whole other world that when you get into Buc-ee's land, and their gas is the same gas as everyone else, right? If they had bad gas, it wouldn't matter, but it's not about the product. There's some systemic things you can do decade after decade that work. So that's the first big idea. Now, what are they? Well, the engine looks like this. The fuel that comes in the engine is customer insight. The more we actually know our customers, the better we can do everything else. And so a lot of people skip this and then they wonder why it's really inefficient, or we guess and it didn't work. It's because you didn't have enough customer insight. So we talk about tactics for getting tuned into your customers. Then there's 3 gears at the heart of the engine. The biggest gear in the first one is operational excellence. I mean, this is the fundamental about the product I was mentioning. Like if the product's bad or you don't deliver on time, and the key question here is, can I trust you? It's not how fancy is your product. How reliable are you? Because if you don't have trust, they don't believe anything else you say. If you don't show up on time or the product breaks or whatever the deal is, like the basics, not the fancy stuff. So get operational excellence. Then we start creating real raving fans with personalized service. It's a little gear, but it matters. It's this personal touch. I see you, I notice you, you matter to me, right? And then the last piece is, how do you activate them? Just because they love you doesn't mean they're talking about you. So you got to create these story-worthy moments. We call them a memorable moment. And so we talk about the kinds of things that make a moment pop and get your customers to go, oh, you got to tell them about these guys. Because when your customers bring you customers who bring you customers, I mean, that is the ultimate business growth engine in the world. And so now wrapping around all that is a belt called Healthy Leadership Team. And we just learned this the hard way. If you don't have a good leadership team, it doesn't work. You could try this tactic or that, but you've got to have this fundamental, it's not a separate gear. It's the loop behind the scenes. It just keeps looping the improvement process, learning together, collaborating. And the key difference, actually, I talk about is healthy versus smart. Everybody keeps thinking, oh, we got to get smarter. Like, I rarely have I ever run across a company where the problem is the leaders weren't smart enough. It's almost always the leaders aren't willing to collaborate, share, listen, learn from each other. It's the health, not the smarts, that holds back most leadership teams. So anyways, when you stack this engine together, and the book the course, I mean, it all just kind of unpacks the methods, the tactics, the principles. But none of you hear this, Bronson. You read that none of this stuff is particularly hard or magical or even that expensive to pull off. But when you stack them, dude, the combination, it feels like magic. You're like, oh, I don't know why these guys are I would challenge listeners to take the companies you love, any brand you go nuts about, and then go test them. Do they tune into their customers? Do they really understand their people? Do they show up with excellence in the basics? Do they have a personal touch? And do they give you at least one moment to pop and be like, just go test it. And you'll see, oh, that's how they did it. They just did these fundamentals. And it's the combination of these seemingly basic things that turns into something truly remarkable.
And it's the consistency. So I always say anybody can be a star for a day, a week, or even a month.
Right.
But to be an all-star for year after year after year, that's where the all-stars are bred from.
Yes.
Because every day that we wake up, we sometimes are different people. Grumpy, discipline goes out the window. That important thing that I thought was important. We don't need to keep the parking lot clean.
Chasing a shiny object, right? Like, ooh, squirrel!
Right.
Look at that cool new thing, and we forget to show up on the base. Oh yeah. I've done all those. Yeah. No, it's right, and I would say that building a legendary brand like this, it's a compound interest kind of thing, right? You start and you're like, I mean, I'm doing good stuff. And it gets a little bit of results, but man, it multiplies itself. And the longer you do it, the more powerful it becomes.
So if you don't mind, let's do a quick case study using your engine. So if we talk about Chick-fil-A, and we talk about the fuel, how is Chick-fil-A getting customer insight in general?
So a lot. They have an entire team they call the voice of the customer that goes through this whole process to it. So I don't know if we mentioned this. I used to be one of the senior leaders at Chick-fil-A. So that I moved to Atlanta for high school, and at the end of high school, finished out there, and happened to go to high school with the guy named Andrew Cathy, who's currently the CEO of Chick-fil-A. And so I've known Andrew and his cousins and parents and uncles, and like I just kind of grown up with these guys over the years. That's how I ended up coming back to Atlanta. I moved away for school, and my Chick-fil-A friend said, "Hey, come work for us." So I've gotten to be an observer for a while, and then they brought me in as a leader and built all this. So I've got a lot of fun insider Chick-fil-A stuff here. So their voice of their customer team does multiple levels of stuff. I mean, they do some industry-wide things. There's lots of like trend reports on food dynamics and eating, and they look at spending dynamics and look at the economics. So this is general, like we need experts to tell us about what's happening in the market at large and for restaurants in America. But man, then they do some really specific stuff with their customers. So they have a very short survey, just a handful of questions. If you've ever gotten an extra long receipt from Chick-fil-A, it's because the second half kicked out this little code with you can sign on and use this code. And by the way, you'll get a free Chick-fil-A sandwich if you take this. And then they ask you a handful of questions. Hey, what about the taste of the food? What about the cleanliness? And they just kind of get into some of this stuff. They send mystery shoppers to come and randomly check in and do what's going on and figure that stuff out. They actually have partnered with a third-party organization to study the processes and policies, because customers can tell you what they experience, but they don't know exactly what we're supposed to do. They just know what it feels like, right? So they also send people behind the scenes who are trained by Chick-fil-A to know our policies, and they surprise visit and check the quality procedures of what's going on. And the headquarters has a person assigned to, it's usually about 25 restaurants per they call these folks, they're kind of consulting lead. And these lead consultants come in and they partner with the franchise owner, because they're franchised, Chick-fil-A is. And so they'll come in and do their own evaluation and sit down with the franchisee. I mean, they have layer after layer. Dude, even this, Brunson. One of the policies at Chick-fil-A headquarters, these are like, big time executives, lawyers, the consultants, real estate guys. I mean, the people kind of behind the scenes working all the system. Everybody at the headquarters has to spend at least one day a year working in a restaurant, serving customers. Like, listen, I know you're a fancy corporate lawyer, right? Great. You're going to work fries or milkshake today. Like, what do you, like, everybody. And by the way, when you get to higher up, you have to spend more days. Some of the top field-facing executives have to spend 4 days a year in a restaurant working an actual position, so that we know our customers, we don't know about them. We encourage you to go back to the same one. So you start building relationships with that franchisee and his staff and that community and see what it feels like. And so different times of the year, they all scatter around. It is not we care. This is one of the big ideas that comes back again and again is people are like, oh, I really care. Good. I'm glad you care. That is not a system. Systems are tactical things you measure and do and discuss and incorporate, practical programs. So there's everything from high intellectual, economic data coming in to the simplicity of just get on site. In fact, I maybe challenge anybody who's listening to this, but you might be thinking, I can't afford a whole team and I don't have all this. Why don't you start with just getting on site? You and your team, one day a year, go work a job. Now, some of you are like, that's what I do. Great. Then maybe you want to start talking about, hey, where can I get outside data? What kind of industry? Some of this stuff's free. Some of this stuff might cost $90 a year, right? But you can start getting some general trends. But that combination of high-level data combined with personal experience, it gets really powerful, man.
Sounds like you need to have the combination of both and not just relying on one or the other. It seems like a lot of companies just like to sit in their office and then pay some sort of company, a data company, to give them all the insights, and then they make their decisions off of that instead of boots on the ground and actually like go talk to your customers and be in the actual service or the live performance of your business.
That's it.
Sam Walton was notorious for doing this.
Oh, constantly. He had got a little plane, got a pilot's license, so he could fly around and pop in unannounced at any of the Walmarts he wanted. Especially back when he was still running it. It was still they weren't international. They weren't even totally national. It was mostly regional. He could get to almost any Walmart in any on the one day. Just fly there, drop in, walk in, surprise people. Yes. Don't underestimate the power of live observation. It's kind of
goes back to what you said earlier with pride, right? In order for you to do that, you kind of have to put your pride to the side.
Yes. I mean, honestly, it's one of the tests they do this Chick-fil-A. I don't know if they do this for everybody, but a certain level of job for mine. One of the things they asked me to do in the interview process was go to a restaurant. And I found out later they told the guy, like, go work for an afternoon in the restaurant, see what it feels like. I was not applying for a position in the restaurant. I was applying for this high-end corporate leadership consultant thing. And the guy put me on the chicken breading table, which is taking raw chicken, dipping it in like this milk and egg wash, putting bread coater on it. I mean, like, and I was back in a corner, and you have to like get up and press. I did 4 hours with nobody talking to me, just smashing chicken in here, and I didn't do it. And they came back and corrected me once because I wasn't doing it right. And what I found is they're like, oh no, that was explicitly a test to see, were you too arrogant and too in academic to just bread chicken, or were you going to have a good attitude about that? So I did it, and then spent an hour with the franchisee, and then they asked him, what do you think about the guy? Not how good his breading skills, but they were bad. I wasn't actually very good at breading. It was my first day. It was like, dude, does he have the heart that we care about? Oh yeah. Get on site and do. You know, one of the more fascinating things, talk about humility, I worked direct when I came. Truett Cathy was still chairman. His son had just taken over CEO. Now the grandson is in charge. But I actually got to do some trips with Truett and be a part of that process. And Dan, his son, does this, and all the executives do this. But you know what Truett was famous for? He could not walk by a piece of trash. Like, he would physically pick up trash everywhere we went. And I've seen Dan, when Dan, his son, would go to a restaurant, we'd do visits with Dan. Before he'd go inside, he'd always take a lap around the building. And we're talking, he's picking up cigarette butts in the drive-thru, right? Because somebody's going to come through the drive-thru and put out their cigarette on the ground. And it just happens. And so the CEO of this multi-billion-dollar company is physically picking up cigarette butts, and then he would go he'd dump them and wash his hands. Don't worry, it was sanitary. But like the very first thing he did was literally physically pick up trash. And so me and all the other executives now, we cannot walk past trash on the ground. I mean, it doesn't matter if I'm Chick-fil-A or not. I'm in the mall. I took my family to Universal Studios for a recent family vacation, and I had to turn, sorry, I got to go pick up some trash. Like, it's the humility is even more impressive to me than the strategy.
Yeah, and one of the that speaks to my heart. That's just especially when you're an owner, you naturally start doing that. I would think, but I always try to help my team adopt this principle of, you see it, you own it.
Yes.
If you see the trash now, as soon as you see it, you now own that. So what are you going to do with it?
Yeah, there's this, and this isn't just Truett. This Disney, I don't think Truett knew this about Walt Disney, but Walt Disney at one point, there's a story, I read one of his biographies. He came to visit one of their retail locations in Disneyland, and he got the manager, and he walked through the store, and he turned around and walked back, and they're doing this conversation. And he went back and forth 3 times, and at the end of the third walk, he fired the guy. And they're like, what? Why am I getting fired? What happened? He goes, 3 times we walked past a piece of trash in the middle of your retail location, and you either didn't notice or noticed and didn't pick it up, and either way, you're the wrong guy for this job.
That's beautiful.
Now, by the way, I don't recommend that as an HR practice. There's probably some paperwork that the lawyers are kind of like, oh, no, do the documentation, blah, 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 right? But as a principle, that level of excellence and ownership, like, this is mine, that's a pattern I've seen in all great brands.
Because we're getting into operational excellence now. So then, what else stands out for you with Chick-fil-A on their big gear of operational excellence?
Man, they put I would say this is part of why some people just love Chick-fil-A. I mean, let's just be blunt. Fast food's not a great industry for a raving fan brands. Maybe some of why we love Chick-fil-A is, you know what? They just don't suck. Like, oh my gosh. And so some of you are like, man, I'm not in a cool brand. Actually, those are some of your best opportunities to create an amazing brand, because part of why we love Buc-ee's, right, is, what do you know? Their bathrooms don't have sticky floors. This is amazing.
Yes.
Right? The worse your industry is, sometimes this alone makes a big deal. And it's the basics, man. So how does Chick-fil-A do this? There's a ton of stuff. I mean, one of the fundamental things is put a scorecard up. Get numbers, get measures, and even things that are hard to score sometimes can be your biggest opportunity. I'll give you a fun Chick-fil-A example. They have 13 ways they measure a Chick-fil-A sandwich to see if it meets standard. And so 2 or 3 times a day, maybe 3 or 4 times a day, they will go grab a sandwich off the line, take it into the back, and test 13 things. There's a little app that we got for them. When I came, it was a paper. You would scribble on a paper and then like mail the paper back, and we finally got them to apps. But it's like, how do you measure how tasty the sandwich is? Well, dude, some of it you stick a thermometer in there. It has to be 160 degrees or hotter, and if it's not, it fails that mark. Like, sorry, that this isn't a good sandwich. One of the other ways, they take pictures. I'm a huge fan of management by picture. How do you, like, wow, especially manufacturing, technical, job site, event teams. I mean, how do you put all that? Take a picture. This is what it looks like. When it looks like the picture, you're done. And if it doesn't, you didn't finish. So they'll say, hey, here's how toasted the bread is. Here's too toasted, too dark. Here's not enough toasted, too light. Is it somewhere in between? Here's ideal. And you look at the picture and you check the box. Yes, no, like how smashed is the bun? It can't be smashed. So they have a side picture. Is it at least 1 inch poofy? And you measure 13 measures to say, how good is a sandwich? How do you measure taste? There are, by the way, the 13th measure is take a bite. Does it taste like it's supposed to? And so you just have to know what it tastes like. So now they don't put the sandwich back on the line. Don't worry, right? And then they chuck the sandwich. Right? This is the cost of the measurement is you burn a sandwich 2 or 3 times a day. But they do that for every product at least once a while. And it's different products in different rotations. The sandwich they sell a ton of, they test a ton of. Some of the less frequent products they don't do 4 times a day. They do it maybe once a day.
They do this in the store, though, in the store.
Every store, every day.
Not from headquarters.
Checking.
Yeah.
And we have outside people check. And we ask, remember that customer survey? One of the things is how good is the taste of your food? And so there's just this constant score coming into the restaurants every 15 minutes. There's a little internal website that gets updated. Hey, your customer said it. Your last stuff said it. Here, we sent in a mystery shopper. Here's what they say. And they just have this live score running in the back that tells the team how are we doing on operational excellence. There's 4 things they check. Taste of food, speed of service. That's very measurable, right? You can see, hey, here's when the order was made. And when it's done, you hit a button and it goes off the screen. If you ever see red flashing, hey, we missed our timeline. Taste of food, speed of service, cleanliness of the restaurant. They also do a customer assessment and a self-assessment. And then the last is attentive and courteous employees. How friendly is our service? And so every one of these has some score that's popping up. And I'll just say this. This alone is one of the more powerful principles of operational excellence. Define the basics and put numbers on it and just put those numbers in front of your team on a regular basis. Humans love scorekeeping. There's a drive and an instinct. If you give us a score, we make a game out of it. Maybe my favorite example of this is bowling. Let's be honest. Bowling is manual labor, right? You're picking up a heavy object, you shove it down a chute, it comes right back to you. And you're supposed to do it exactly the same every time. Like you don't even get to get creative with your bowl. Like, no. Line up, hit that little narrow. If you take it, we did this one time. We took a bunch of Chick-fil-A team members, frontline employees in Atlanta, and we took them over to a local bowling alley and said, hey, reward for your deal. We're going to pay you to bowl. And they're like, this is awesome. And they got all their stuff. And then what they found is we'd covered the screens, tape paper over them, and we put like a curtain, hung PVC pipe in a sheet so a ball would roll through, but they couldn't see the pins. And we said, go bowl, but you don't get to see the score. And they hated it, man. Like within an hour, people are like, can I go home? And do I have to do this? And without a score, nobody likes bowling. It's boring. Now, put a score on it. And what we did is we took the paper down, like, oh, okay. Dude, they stayed another 2 hours. They'll pay you to do it if you give them a score. Now, I don't know if you're going to get your employees to pay you to show up at work, but bowling at least, we couldn't pay them to do it, but you gave them a score, make a game out of it. So there's this deep drive. Get numbers on what your fundamentals are, put them in front of your team on a regular basis, and let the human instinct start happening. People just start figuring out, how do I crank these numbers up? It gets interesting. So yeah, it's not the fancy stuff. It's not hype talks. What's that old leadership joke? The beatings will continue until morale improves, right? That is not how this works, right? You don't have to get out there and whip the troops to keep them going. You just build some systemic things that start cranking up excellence. And man, that's the biggest gear in the engine. It's work, it's effort, it's discipline. And that is the heart of a brand. Can I trust you?
Focus on the basics. Focus on the things that that make your business who it is, really, the product and the service, and make it be consistent with providing that to the customer. You're basically delivering on the promise that you gave them at the sale. So why not deliver that promise? But of course, you want to go even further than that, because then we start creating that value above that price that they paid, which goes into personalized service. So what would be an example for Chick-fil-A with personalized service in that gear?
So we talk about two gears to pull here: high touch and high tech. So high touch. So my job at Chick-fil-A was a really unique job. My title was Organizational Effectiveness Consultant. And my job was to go travel the world, spend half my time going inside great brands. How do they do it? Learn their systems, work with their teams. And the other half was come back to Chick-fil-A and lead some sort of upgrade. Hey, I learned this new thing. We're going to do a new program for it. So it's tough, Bronson. I mean, there's a lot of sacrifice. I mean, I had to spend time at Ritz-Carlton and Four Seasons and, all the fun. We had to get all the Michelin restaurants in the U.S. It's tough.
Wow,
but my sacrifice.
What a life.
Yeah, thanks, man. Yeah, God sustained me through those days. Yeah, there were some difficult days, but those were not those days. Those were pretty fun. And we brought a lot of this high-touch stuff back. And it turned out to be a lot simpler than most people think. They're like, oh, you have to have a ton of money to do this. Now, when we get to tech, there are some cool tools that you have to invest in a little bit. But man, high-touch. Let me give you one example. We stole from Ritz-Carlton the phrase, "It's my pleasure." Now, Chick-fil-A is kind of infamous for that now. That's a Ritz-Carlton.
I didn't know that.
They've been doing this for decades. And our founder, we visit, and he was like, "Ooh, that's nice. And that's free. We're doing that." And he's like, "Everybody, we're saying my pleasure."
That's what Truett said?
That's my Truett impersonation. So, yeah, he came back and and we were like, dude, how else? So we have all these little words that we shift. Like we tell them to come to your table and do a little table touch-in. And we don't say, "Can I get your trash?" Take your trash away if you're there, because we don't want you to think about trash on your table. So we say, "Can I clear your tray? And may I refresh your beverage? And it's my pleasure." All of that was stolen from fine dining restaurants, Ritz-Carlton. Just elevate your language. And it doesn't have to be just restaurants. I worked with a nursing home. And a nursing home, so the entry-level position is a CNA, a certified nursing assistant. And they do basic stuff, right? They dispense pills and clean rooms and wipe bottoms. And it's pretty, tactical things you have to do to take care of folks in a nursing home. Well, this one group we worked with in Texas, they've got 30-some nursing homes. They said, we want to just elevate this experience. It's still the same role. They have to still get the same certification, but we're going to call them caregivers. And instead of talking about residents or patients who live in the nursing home, we're going to call them our family members. So our caregivers taking care of our family members. Disney, you talked about Disney. They've got their own version of this elevating. They talk about cast. They don't call them employees. They're cast members, right? And they create magic moments and all this stuff the language around it. So that cost no money whatsoever. Now some of you might be fancy. Some of you might want to be funny. One of the software firms we've worked with in Silicon Valley, they're super nerds. They do Jedi language for everything they have, right? The Star Wars lingo, like entry-level roles are Padawans, right? And then they get the Jedi Master, and their rooms are Tatooine 1. Everything is Star Wars themed, and man, that really works with them and their customers. And so talk differently. Elevate the way you talk. Don't be generic. Be specific. Put your personality to it. Make your customers feel special. So, that's a small little thing that just makes people feel like, man, these people they've got their own personality and they feel nice. And so there's high touch stuff you do. Now there's high tech. That can be a little bit of money, but I will tell you this, dude, in the last 6 months, AI has gone from being a cool toy to a core tool. I mean, it is a big deal. And if you're not playing with AI, you've got to start doing it. The problem is most of us learned what AI was from watching movies, right? Like we know, you know what it is, Bronze. It's robots. Yeah. They're going to kill us all and take over the world, right? Thankfully, we don't have that kind of
it's
AI
all Terminator.
yet. Yeah, exactly. What we do have is a whole bunch of stuff that the movies don't take seriously because they're not, it's not very exciting. But dude, from a business standpoint, AI has gotten amazing, and this is key, and really cheap. Most of this stuff is like a little to no cost subscription, $50 a month kind of stuff that can revolutionize this part of your business or speed up that part of your business, from customer insight to operational stuff to communication. It is phenomenal. So there's a whole new division in my company this last 6 months that we now do a ton of it. We've been dabbling, like our tech companies. Some of our companies we've been partnering with are AI companies. So for 7, 8 years, I've been doing AI work, but it was like, it's not really applicable for everybody. It's this niche. And in the last 6 to 9 months, oh no, there were like 3 different streams of AI all kind of hit their critical mass and crossed the threshold. And so now we're doing AI projects with almost all of our customers have some AI play in them. And so there is some cool personalizing stuff you can do with technology, and it used to be really expensive. And now you probably can get a subscription for it. So there's but these are little touches, man. Once or twice a year, do 1 or 2 things that says, I see you, you matter, a personalized, customized moment for that customer. It makes a huge difference. It's not a lot of work, and it makes a lot of impact.
Unfortunately, we're getting to the end of this, but I do want to first tell the listeners, if you want to learn more about the memorable moments, as well as a healthy leadership team, part of that engine, please read his book. It is well worth your time. But I do want to add this final question. How do you bring your faith into your workplace?
Well, it goes back to when I was founding my company. So consulting company. I used to work for Chick-fil-A, left to build my own consulting firm. The first client to sign with me was Chick-fil-A, so I still work with them as a consultant vendor now, but not on staff. And so I was figuring out my company. I was trying to figure out, so faith, I want this to be a big deal. How faith forward am I? What does that look like? And I remember, so I have my own coach. I'm a coach. I believe in the coaching process so much. I have my own coach as well. So I was working through this with my business coach, and he's like, listen, he goes, that's not how this works. I don't care if you call yourself Christian Consultants for Christ, right? And your logo is a cross. I mean, with a fish behind it. I don't care. Here's what I want to know. Are you going to operate differently? Are you going to function differently than every other consulting company out there? That's whether your faith shows up in your work or not. I don't care what the title of your company is. So we end up going with a more generic title, Swaz Consulting. Which is honestly it's my childhood nickname, Swaz, Scott Wozniak. Mostly because all the other cool consulting names are taken. There's a lot of consulting, leadership, strategy companies out there. So like we went with the Google or Yahoo strategy. It means nothing, and we'll make it mean something.
Yeah.
So then I can at least own the website and all that. So the name is generic, right? It is how we operate that our faith shows up. It is everything from how we hire and treat our staff, the generosity and integrity of that. It is how we take care of our clients. Yesterday, I was talking with a guy. He's a CMO of a major brand. I'm not going to, because you hear the story, I won't tell who it is, but like they just signed a deal with Amazon to launch a whole new product. Amazon VP's headquarters, not like they've got a page on Amazon. Like they're partnered with Amazon on major product launches. This is a really cool company. And the CMO, we've been working together for years. And he said, man, can we just talk? It wasn't even a business call. He said, I want to talk about my marriage. Because, dude, I had a really rough spot this week. And I don't know who else I feel like I can talk about this with. I'm a big public brand. I don't want to post about this. But man, you seem like the kind of guy I can open up with. And so I ended up praying with him and going through this whole process. Some of what I get to do is I just become the partner, and we come in the door through business, and we end up talking about their whole life. But we earn that by being excellent at our job and treating them with excellence. And I share a little bit about my story. And so it's been a really fun. I do think there's a calling for people to explicitly, aggressively evangelize as their main day thing they do. And I do that some through my church and mission trips I'll be a part of. But a lot of my personal calling, I feel, is more on the discipleship side, is building the relationships and doing the long, slow walk with people. And some of my clients are very much Christian CEOs running like the Chick-fil-A family, right? And I still work with those guys. And some of my clients are like this guy who would not be a professing Christian, but he's built a relationship of trust with me that he's like, man, you're the guy I want to talk to with this stuff. And so I get to do that. That's my version of kind of evangelism these days. Is that guy's probably not going to go to a church. I mean, he certainly isn't attending churches anywhere. But because of our professional thing that turned into a friendship has now turned into something more. So my faith is kind of threaded throughout, and I didn't end up calling myself Christian Consultants for Christ. So, and I think because of that, I might be able to reach a few other folks differently. So, yeah. It's how we work, less about the name we give it.
So last little bonus question here before we wrap this up. There's a lot of companies out there that will, maybe not a lot, but there are some out there that claim to be a Christian company, et cetera, et cetera. But you always wonder what's going on behind the scenes. And we've heard we've seen on the news that maybe even in churches that it's not necessarily what we thought. So then my question to you is Chick-fil-A, are they the real deal behind the scenes?
100%. So we don't have time to do a podcast on this, but let me just say the national news about them, I have almost never seen it be accurate. Frankly, either on the right or the left. People take them and run with it and take there's some in there and then they go wild with it. I'll just give one example. Some of the right folks, a Christian conservative world, freaked out last round. I was 3, 4, 5 years ago now. It turned out one of their board members gave some free food to a group who gave some money to a really non-Christian group, a pretty anti-Christian, anti-biblical group. And then the news runs with this and says, the Cathys have walked away from Christian values and they're supporting the enemy, and one little thing and people go nuts with it. Here's what I would say. They are very much the real deal. There is authentic and real individually on their faith. I mean, they're my friends. And I could speak to every single, there's 3 branches of the family. That's the other factor. The family now, there's 3 branches. Each branch has its own ministries and foundations and businesses. And it's a lot bigger than just one dude in one company now. But I don't know anybody in any of the 3 branches that doesn't have an authentic faith with Jesus, is not working it out. They're human, like you and me. They're not all doing it perfectly, but every one of them is actively got a relationship with God, striving to live that out. And they have lots of honest, challenging conversations about how do we show up in a business that gives love and dignity and grace the way Jesus loved everybody without violating our standards, and what stances should we take and what stances shouldn't we take. And I'm not saying they're always going to get it right or they always have gotten it right, but I will tell you they are legit people who are following God, who are trying to figure out how to do it well. And the closer I've gotten, the more I respect them. Sadly, Bronson, I can't say that about most of the Christian companies. Not a few. Yeah. The great majority of the Christian companies, the closer I've got, the shallower it looks. And they're one of the beautiful, rare exceptions. The Cathys are some of my favorite humans on the planet. Oh, yeah, they happen to own this really cool business. But I'm more impressed with the family they've built than the business they've built. They're the real deal, man.
Thank you so much for coming on the show and taking the time to do this. If you have not checked out his book, please do so. It's called Make Your Brand Legendary, Create Raving Fans with the Customer Experience Engine by Scott Wozniak. Look it up on Amazon or any other place that you get books. Audible as well. I listened to it, and I actually have the physical book, and I think I even downloaded the Kindle. I like to do that too because I like to see the digital format so I can copy and paste things in my notes. But
I've done that
ultimately,
for my favorite book as well.
Yeah, I have the 3, the trinity of the book. Yeah, so, right. What's your website?
Yeah, probably the easiest way is to go to scottwozniak.com. That's SCOTTWOZNIAK.com. You can see my newsletter, my company's linked to that, the book. That's probably the great hub if you want to check out more of what I'm doing, is just go to scottwozniak.com.
And we'll throw all those links on our website at aboutourfathers.business. That's our website. Scott, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Man, my pleasure too, buddy. Love talking with you.